Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Carl Ryden, an esteemed alumnus of the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics. Carl is the co-founder of Precision Lender, a leading banking software company that empowers financial institutions to build stronger client relationships through data-driven insights and AI-powered solutions. Beyond his entrepreneurial success, Carl is deeply committed to education and innovation. He has made significant contributions to NCSM, including a $2 million gift to establish the Ryden Program for Innovation and Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. Carl now serves as a member of the NCSM Board of Trustees, where he continues to support the school's mission and inspire the next generation of leaders. Our conversation will explore Carl's journey, the pivotal moments that shaped his career, and his advice for aspiring entrepreneurs and innovators. Mr. Ryden, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Just to start off, Mr. Ryden, reflecting on your formative years, could you share how your upbringing and education at NCSM influenced your career path?
Oh yeah, I think I've shared this a few times in the past. So I grew up in rural Wayne County, southern Wayne County, not even a town, near a town kind of thing. And single parent households, a free lunch kid. Mom worked at Walmart. Parents were separated when I was really young. And I was always categorized. I tested well, so I was categorized in all the like, gifted classes. But I would say in eighth grade, I was kind of a high B student, not even high B. I was probably a B student, and mostly because I didn't. Um, I found school boring. I wore out my library card reading books and everything I could find. And then my mom was smart, is kind of tricked into buying me a computer, a Commodore VIC-20. You probably don't even know what that is, but it was one of the early personal computers. Um, and so I would spend my days working on that and programming that. And I'd go to school when they required me to. In eighth grade, I probably missed 30 days of school just because I just didn't feel like going. And in ninth grade, I had a teacher, Miss Joyner, who uh, challenged me like never before. And that year, I ended up getting 100 average in all of my classes, including hers. And the next year, in sophomore at Southern Wayne, I was the president of the honor society that I'd heretofore never been a member of, and found myself backsliding. And then Miss Joyner and others came to me and said, "Hey, they built a school for kids like you in Durham. You really ought to go." So I applied, interviewed with. They used to interview back in those days, interview with Ross Baker, and I told her in the interview, "You built the school for kids like me," and she let me in. And I would say the going there and the people I got to know, the people I spent time with at nights in the dorms, the smartest people I went on to NC State and then to MIT and all that, but the smartest people I was ever around were the ones on my hall at Science and Math, and in my dorm, the ones I hung around with, and I learned so much just from being around those folks. Even I was not a I was not a straight A student by any means at Science and Math. I was not. I had. I think I ultimately finished up with all A's and B's, but there were some C's on the way there. And so I always tell the kids, and I actually asked the chancellor this week to send me a copy of my um, transcript from Science and Math so that I could share with some of the kids who I coach on the robotics teams and others who are stressing out about grades and everything. Is like, hey, let me show you my transcript just so it's not as high stakes as you think it is. So it changed the trajectory of my life. I say the reason I gave back to the school was that I told the chancellor then, I said, it's not really a debt that I can repay. They're an equity investor in my future. And so whenever I have a really great outcome, I tend to share that back with those who invested in me.
That's wonderful, Mr. Ryden. Those sound like significant turning points that have affected your career and life. What inspired you to co-found Precision Lender, and how did your vision for the company evolve over time?
It was luck. It was so, out of science and math, I went to NC State. While I was there, got pulled onto a team designing the first notebook computers ever at IBM, working for a guy named Tim Cook, who was dude who rode his bike to work every day, and really smart guy. I didn't think kind of run the most valuable company on earth smart, but definitely a smart guy. But then, I ended up going to back to a startup company, then back to MIT, and then long story short, I ended up at a venture company and then at Bain, then at venture company. And I had left that and I was going to start a company of my own. I didn't know what. And my neighbor said, while you're thinking about that, why don't you come help us work on this banking software thing? And I'm like, sure, that'll be fun. And I literally did it for free, just as I hadn't done programming in a long time, and I thought, man, programming would be peaceful and wonderful. Um, and then I got in it, and I really loved it. And so we did that and built a banking software company and sold it to Jack Henry in 2006, four, somewhere there. And then 2004, sold it in 2006, I think. And then I thought that was fun. Moved back to North Carolina, was working for the company that acquired us for a little bit, and then decided in 2009 to start PL as a cloud-based new version of a similar product, right? And how that came to be is when I was in the venture business, I had invested in a company that was really investable because there was a guy named Ken Garcia there, and Ken and I became friends, being on opposite sides of that deal, but just built enormous respect for each other. And after I'd sold the one company, Ken had built and sold another. He sold that company and then built and sold another company. And he and I were talking about what we might do together one day. And I said, Ken, this is May of 2009. I said, Ken, the last company I built, the guys there aren't doing a whole lot with it. I think this cloud thing is going to be huge. I think doing the whole thing again in the cloud would be amazingly powerful that we could do with data and other things. And we said, okay, we'll start it. And so what's amazing is Precision Lender. I'm no longer I'm still the co-founder, but we sold Precision Lender in 2019 to Q2, who's a great company. And I just recently left Q2 in September of this year, about 5 years later. And now I've started another company with Ken that's local here in Cary. But that journey, I kid folks, banking software, I actually wrote the first version of the software. I've never worked in a bank. I've never loaned anybody any money that they paid me back. But software that I wrote and designed and took to market has been used to price probably $40 trillion of commercial loans. I mean, if you say that out loud, it is one of those. What's the Marshall McLean, I think is his name. Quote: I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. So sometimes having a different perspective on things, and so on all those fronts, and you'll see it come through that it was not about an idea or a vision or any of that. It was about just kind of people that I trusted and enjoyed, working with, and that leads you to interesting problems. And if you fall in love with the problem and just like want to solve it, how commercial lenders actually think about pricing commercial loans is a fascinating problem that I ultimately just became really fascinated with and fell in love with. And then from that, the solution kind of falls out. So I always tell folks is like, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem, and literally throw away solutions to get to a better solution for a problem is a better way to go. So that's a
That's
little bit.
fantastic, Mr. Ryden. Yeah, and it sounds like your work at Precision Lender has led to significant impact, which is really great. Could you
Yeah.
discuss the challenges that you faced in bootstrapping the company and how you navigated those obstacles?
Well, we started the company with the idea of so like I said, Ken and I had both been successful. We had built and sold companies at smaller outcomes, but good outcomes. And Ken had been in the private equity business. I had been in the venture business. That's how I met Ken. And then we started Precision Lender. Our goal was we're never going to raise outside capital. We don't want to do it. We got to about 4.5 million of recurring revenue. We're generating cash, paying ourselves, all that stuff, and growing about 100% a year, adding about a bank every week, about two banks a week or so at that time. And then we had all sorts of venture guys would always come to us, and we would just say no. One kind of worked its way through our shields and ended up meeting with Ken, and that led to a whole sequence of things where we said, hey, maybe we'll do this. And then we ended up talking to a bunch of others and ended up some of the best venture firms in the world were really want to do it, and we ended up going back to the first guys. And when we did that, I don't know the audience for this, if they're familiar with equity raise, whatever, we end up doing half primary, half secondary to de-risk the company to ourselves, our employees, our customers across the board. And so we put 5 million on the balance sheet, put 6 million in our pockets, and then went a little further. And then we did another half primary, half secondary for 20 million. And then we did it all secondary with Insight for 90 million almost. And then we sold the whole company for 510 in 2019. So that was kind of the way we went through that. But how we went about it was it was very, very tough. It is frightening at times. We're doing really well. We're at our first Christmas party where we had like 20 some people and their family and kids, at the Christmas party. And one of my co-founders, Patrick, was there, and he's no longer with the business, but he was like, pat me on the back and said, it's got to feel good looking at this, kind of what you built. And I looked at him and said, man, it's terrifying because now all of these folks, they're in a good spot. We had a great culture. People loved working there. If I zig when I should zag, if I make a wrong decision when I should make a right decision, it's not just me, you know, uh, I might screw this up for all of us. And so it was actually kind of uh, terrifying. Ken and I did a presentation once. We got asked to do one at Wake Forest University, which is some PhD students about entrepreneurship, which, by the way, I think not to cast, but a lot of times PhD students are the worst possible demographic to go at entrepreneurship. But we told them the story of Ken's company, Ecovation, and when we funded it, it was some squirrely professors out of Cornell and maybe a couple $1 million of revenue. When we sold the company, we sold it for 200 million cash at the end. And you think, well, okay, well, that's like a great straight line up and to the right. But there were several points along there where it was literally, last one to leave today, turn off the lights. I think we're cooked, you know. And Ken and I, the title of our presentation is, so do you think you like near-death experiences, right? And if you do, maybe this is for you. And it turns out PhD students don't like near-death experiences. That's why they're PhD students, and it kind of scared the hell out of all of them. But it was probably the right message they needed to hear.
That's really a fantastic story, Mr. Rudd. Now, in 2018, you and your wife, Ashley, made a $2 million donation to NCSM to establish the Ryden Program for Innovation and Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. What motivated this contribution, and what are your aspirations for the program?
So, so initially, well, a couple motivations. One was I said earlier, kind of the school had a huge impact on me, and it felt like they were an equity partner in my future. So I wanted to contribute back to the thing that had helped me so much, right? And I think that's something that everybody ought to take away, and do. I originally wanted to do it anonymously, and just, um, but the chancellor and others said, "Hey, look, we actually think you doing it not anonymously would allow us to catalyze this and encourage other folks to give as well." And it took some talking, but he eventually convinced me to do it. So we did it. And ultimately he was right because it did catalyze other alumni because you're seeing the renovations that are taking place to the residence halls now was, I think, due to a $7 million gift given by another alumni that was in part kind of motivated by that. But one is I wanted to give back. Second is I wanted to be anonymous, but then I was talked out of it, and I think the chancellor was right on that. And then the third thing of kind of for what? Um, my at the when we launched the program, I said to everyone in attendance, I said, an algorithm probably got you here today. An algorithm is going to get you home today. An algorithm will tell you who to connect with and who you should connect with on both social media, on LinkedIn for professional, on personal. If you go ask Google, it'll probably tell you what's true or what you should believe is true. And algorithms shape a lot of our interactions with the world today. And I don't think how to build them to do the great things they can do, but also to do it responsibly. So our only hope is the kids at the school like science and math to come out of there armed with the things they need to kind of lead in the way that needs to lead. So it was a little bit of like, hey, let's go to the source of the folks who can actually have the most impact and kind of then give them a chance to shine. It was funny also, like the school came to me and said, well, do you want to, let's sit down and meet together and talk about how much we draw down over time and what we can spend it on and what we can't. I'm like, I'm not, no, I gave it to you because I believe you are the best people to make those decisions. You're closest to it, right? Here's what I want you to do. You go do amazing stuff with it and then come back to me in whatever in years and say, look at all the stuff we could do. Not just me, come to other folks and say, look at what we could do with 2 million. Imagine what we could do with 10, right? And that sort of thing, trying to push that kind of growth mindset into kind of a institution like science and math is I think um, difficult, but also really um, helpful, necessary. And so I think uh, ultimately, I thought it was something really important that needed to be worked on, and I think it was the best place to start and catalyze it there at the school.
It's fantastic, Mr. Ryden. Now, drawing from your extensive experience, what advice would you offer to current NCSM students and aspiring entrepreneurs that are looking to make their mark in the tech industry?
Well, I would say I wouldn't necessarily confine entrepreneurship just to tech. Tech is just a place where there's a lot of leverage, a lot of operating leverage in there. Um, but I had a guy once who was a really smart guy, worked with me at Bain. He was a UNC grad, and he had been accepted to Harvard Business School. And he asked me to go to lunch because I was a few years ahead of him. I graduated from MIT and I knew him from being an associate consultant at Bain. He was an associate when I was a consultant. Anyway, his name's Carl also. We went to lunch and he said, they might going to Harvard Business School. And I was like, okay, what do you want to do? He says, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, well, what I would do is before I would take the $200,000 or it was probably $500,000 all in with opportunity cost. It was going to cost him to go to Harvard for 2 years. I said, if you took half of that and just went out and bought a business, I don't care if it's a lawn mowing business, a commercial landscape business, any kind of business, and just ran the hell out of it for 2 years, you would learn more about entrepreneurship than you probably learn at Harvard. Harvard's really good at producing folks who are go work for Procter and Gamble and consumer package, big corporations, go work for on Wall Street, go work for a consultant firm, Bain or McKinsey or whatever. But I don't think it was I don't know if it was suited to the task. So I always tell folks one of my favorite books of all time, business books particularly, probably my favorite business book is it's required reading for all execs at Amazon because it was required reading at the program at MIT I went to. It's called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, Goal, The Goal. And it's written as a novel, which is fascinating. It's not a textbook, it's written as a story. And it really starts with what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve? And then kind of work backwards from that. And the book, it just does a great job of kind of better than I'll ever do at explaining how to think about that. But I would always say, what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Step one in achieving a goal is having a goal, claiming it, and then to start working towards it. And you can change the goal later. It's not set in stone. It's your goal. You get to choose that. Um, I see a lot of kids at science and math, really smart kids. One other piece of advice I give a lot to kids whenever they ask me, and sometimes when they don't, um, is I see a lot of kids at science and math uh, following the same pattern where they all are the straight A kids who did the RChem, who did the whatever, they got the tutors, they had their resumes all look the same because they're following kind of this meta of what a kid that gets you into the next level of whatever the next hoop you're supposed to all jump through. And they end up competing on the fourth decimal place of GPA or something like that, right? And there's a great quote from Jerry Garcia. Do you know who Jerry Garcia is?
I've heard of him.
Huh? He's the lead singer of the Grateful Dead, right?
Right.
And he had this great quote, which is, "Don't be the best, be the only." You know, and I see him competing at the fourth decimal place to be the best. But ultimately, if you're just the only one who is this, right, you tend to do a lot better. And I've talked to a lot of them. I've known over the years. I've taught entrepreneurship at Science and Math now for like 12 years or something. I've helped with the robotics teams for about the same number of time. It's just a whole string. I had lunch earlier this week with Aditya Iyengar, um, who was in my entrepreneurship class, worked for me at PL as an internship, and then went to Berkeley and now as a VC. And he said it took him a while to figure that out, that, not to follow the crowd, you know. Um, so I would tell folks is don't be the best, be the only, you know, and whatever that is, it doesn't matter, and not be afraid of it. My other thing is, um, and I told my son goes to science and math at Morganton, and I told him when he went there, and I have to remind myself and him of this as well. I said, you'll have a moment where, hey, I can spend this evening with these friends, you know, and build a deeper relationship with them, or I could grind it out and get, a few extra points on this assignment. I said, in the long run, I think you'll value the spending the time with the friends a lot better, you know? And so I also love the activities like robotics and other things that encourage that.
Don't be the best, be the only. That's truly fantastic, Mr. Ryden. And I think it's a great it's a great quote that really encapsulates everything that you've done and that you aspire for students in NC. Well, that's all for today, and I really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing the continued impact of your work and contributions to the community.
Sure. Thanks.